Hidden deep within the corporate registry of Delaware lies an unprecedented legal anomaly, a specific operating agreement governing the most aggressively valued startup in modern history. While retail investors fixate on generative output and user acquisition metrics, institutional capital silently monitors a structural paradox embedded in OpenAI's foundational charter. The $14 billion infrastructural alliance between Microsoft and OpenAI is not a standard venture capital deployment. It is a highly conditional lease, heavily dependent on an arbitrary technological threshold. Specifically, this framework contains a terminal provision known as the AGI Determination Clause. This clause dictates that the moment OpenAI's internal governance board declares the achievement of artificial general intelligence, Microsoft's commercial licensing rights instantaneously evaporate. You're looking at the only enterprise on Earth structurally designed to commit corporate suicide the exact moment it achieves ultimate product-market fit. The closer the engineering teams get to their mission, the closer they push their organizational framework toward a catastrophic liquidation of their primary revenue pipeline. This deliberate architectural friction shatters traditional models of asymmetric return on equity. In a conventional tech ecosystem, a breakthrough guarantees a monopolistic moat. In the OpenAI paradigm, a breakthrough triggers an absolute severing of foundational compute provisioning. But the AGI clause is merely the first layer of a dual-pronged existential threat. The secondary mechanism capable of functionally destroying ChatGPT lies in the latent space of data licensing contracts and the emerging legal doctrine of algorithmic disgorgement. Foundational models operate by compressing petabytes of copyrighted intellectual property into mathematical weights. If current aggressive litigation regarding unauthorized ingestion of premium journalistic archives results in a definitive copyright breach ruling, courts will not simply issue a monetary fine. They will mandate the deletion of the contaminated model. Because of a neural network's indivisible nature, you cannot surgically extract specific copyrighted data. The entire multi-million-dollar training run must be incinerated. The operational viability of ChatGPT balances precariously on fair use semantics and a self-destruct button controlled by a non-profit board. To truly dissect this vulnerability, we must reverse engineer the corporate DNA established during OpenAI's 2015 inception. Originally structured as a pure 501c3 nonprofit, the entity was engineered with a strict fiduciary duty to humanity rather than a mandate for shareholder value maximization. However, the sheer capital intensity required for training foundational architectures rapidly outpaced philanthropic liquidity. By 2019, recognizing the severe compute bottlenecks inherent in deep learning scaling laws, the founders executed a highly unorthodox maneuver, wrapping a capped profit operating company inside the original nonprofit shell. Investors were no longer purchasing standard equity. They were purchasing debt-like instruments with a capped upside, originally limited to 100 times the initial investment. The overarching nonprofit board retained absolute control, creating a scenario where ultimate decision-makers possessed zero fiduciary obligation to protect the financial interests of the entities funding their server farms. This unprecedented corporate topology set the stage for the most fragile capitalization table in Silicon Valley history. The intricacies of this transition paved the way for the historic Microsoft partnership, a deal fundamentally misunderstood by retail analysts. Microsoft did not simply wire billions of liquid capital into OpenAI's treasury. Instead, they executed a sophisticated infrastructural arbitrage strategy, providing the vast majority of their investment via specialized Azure compute credits. In exchange for absorbing catastrophic hardware deprecation costs and subsidizing massive energy consumption, Microsoft secured an exclusive license to commercialize OpenAI's pre-AGI intellectual property. Yet, the governing legal contract firmly designates OpenAI as an independent entity merely leasing this capacity. Microsoft outsourced its foundational research risk, securing near-monopolistic distribution rights, while meticulously insulating its own balance sheet from the severe legal liabilities associated with massive, unfiltered Internet scraping. This symbiotic yet adversarial dynamic ensures OpenAI remains permanently tethered to Microsoft's server racks, unable to independently sustain the computational velocity required to maintain market dominance without continuous external subsidies. Delving into the forensic accounting reveals the unsustainable mathematics threatening to fracture the partnership. Industry intelligence indicates OpenAI operates at a staggering computational burn rate, expending approximately $700,000 daily strictly to maintain inference capabilities for the ChatGPT interface. Furthermore, the underlying architecture is a highly complex mixture of experts' paradigm. GPT-4 utilizes roughly 1.8 trillion parameters distributed across 12 specialized submodels. Executing the foundational training run consumed an estimated $100 million in raw compute cost, utilizing clusters of tens of thousands of specialized H100 Tensor Core GPUs. The revenue-sharing waterfall explicitly dictates that Microsoft is entitled to 75% of OpenAI's commercial profits until their principal investment is recouped. Once achieved, the distribution dynamically shifts to 49% up to the predetermined profit cap. This labyrinthine financial engineering ensures the entity engineering the intelligence captures only a fractional percentage of the immediate enterprise value it generates, severely starving its independent capital reserves. Simultaneously, algorithmic disgorgement presents an unquantifiable liability entirely ignored by standard discounted cash flow valuations. The New York Times lawsuit utilizes the Digital Millennium Copyright Act to attack the foundation of generative pre-training. If plaintiffs successfully prove OpenAI systematically ingested proprietary datasets to construct their semantic weights, the legal remedy transcends financial compensation. Plaintiffs explicitly demand total destruction of all models trained on contested data. Because an AI model distributes knowledge across a multidimensional matrix, there is no technical mechanism to unlearn specific copyrighted material. Compliance requires OpenAI to permanently delete their most advanced foundational architectures and execute entirely new training protocols using strictly licensed, heavily sanitized data corpuses. Given that the next iteration of frontier models demands training costs approaching $1 billion, a forced disgorgement ruling would instantly bankrupt the commercial subsidiary, nullifying their operational runway and triggering an immediate collapse of their enterprise valuation. Returning to the apex of this vulnerability, we examine the weaponization of the AGI determination clause. The contract explicitly grants the OpenAI nonprofit board the sole, unchallengeable authority to declare when artificial general intelligence is reached. Because AGI is a highly subjective philosophical concept rather than a mathematically precise engineering metric, this clause functions as a legally binding self-destruct mechanism dependent entirely on human interpretation. The moment the board passes a resolution affirming AGI, Microsoft's commercial license to that specific future iteration is instantly revoked. Consequently, OpenAI's executive leadership faces an impossible strategic paradox. They must continue pushing boundaries to justify their multi-billion-dollar private market valuation, while simultaneously engineering internal benchmarks to avoid triggering the exact contractual definition that would sever their access to Microsoft's indispensable Azure infrastructure. It is a high-stakes balancing act between technological progression and corporate survival, driven entirely by arbitrary semantic thresholds. The fragility of this legal scaffolding was violently exposed during the unprecedented boardroom coup that temporarily ousted the chief executive. This wasn't merely a clash of personalities, it was a structural stress test of the capped profit paradox. The non-profit board attempted to exercise absolute fiduciary authority, completely disregarding the catastrophic destruction of enterprise value it would trigger for infrastructural partners. The rapid reversal fundamentally altered the balance of power, forcing a strategic shift in the company's trajectory. Recognizing that current legal dependencies are functionally terminal, leadership has aggressively pivoted toward achieving vertical integration. They are actively courting sovereign wealth funds, pitching an audacious $7 trillion semiconductor manufacturing initiative designed to bypass existing supply chain monopolies. This maneuver is a desperate attempt to rewrite the underlying mathematics of their business model, securing proprietary silicon before the dual threats of algorithmic disgorgement or the AGI clause can fully collapse operations. Furthermore, to preempt the inevitable collapse of their current corporate topology, strategists are actively lobbying to restructure the organization into a traditional public benefit corporation. This evolution is critical to neutralize the immediate threat posed by heavily capitalized open-weight competitors. Entities releasing highly capable foundational models under permissive licenses are drastically commoditizing the inference market, executing aggressive infrastructural arbitrage by shifting deployment costs directly onto the end user. To compete in this rapidly depreciating margin environment, OpenAI must possess the ability to offer highly liquid equity packages to retain apex engineering talent. The archaic capped profit model, governed by an unpredictable philanthropic board, renders them highly vulnerable to aggressive talent poaching. By dismantling the non-profit oversight mechanism and converting to a standard commercial entity, they aim to void the anomalous contractual clauses threatening their existence. This transition ensures basic corporate survival in a landscape where raw intelligence costs trend toward marginal zero. The impending resolution of OpenAI's architectural crisis offers a profound masterclass in the ruthless mechanics of venture scaling. The ultimate lesson is that you cannot sustainably out-engineer a fundamentally flawed legal and corporate architecture. No magnitude of computational supremacy or algorithmic breakthrough can compensate for a capitalization table designed to cannibalize itself upon achieving its primary objective. For founders and institutional capital allocators, the takeaway is absolute. The legal frameworks governing intellectual property and infrastructural dependencies are just as critical as the core technology itself. Failing to align corporate governance with long-term commercial realities guarantees your greatest technological triumph will simultaneously become your terminal business failure. As this unprecedented corporate drama accelerates, we are witnessing the definitive stress test of modern technological capitalism. If you're engineering high asymmetry ventures or actively deploying capital in frontier markets, you cannot afford to ignore structural blueprints. Stay analytical, study the underlying contracts, and I will see you in the next breakdown.